I will destroy you. I will sue you until you have nothing left. These words were screamed by Eleanor Blackwood, one of the most powerful women in New York, as salmon and sauce dripped down her platinum hair. 30 seconds earlier, a waitress named Grace had done the unthinkable. She poured an entire dinner plate over the head of a billionaire's mother, in front of 100 wealthy guests, in front of cameras. And she did not run. She folded her apron, looked Eleanor in the eye, and said words that would change both their lives forever. But here is what no one expected. The woman Grace humiliated was the mother of Nathaniel Blackwood, a man whose family could crush anyone. And watching from the shadows was his most trusted man, recording every second. What happens when a waitress with nothing challenges a dynasty with everything? What Grace did not know was that her moment of rage would lead to something she never imagined. Not destruction, not revenge, but love. Stay with me. This story will surprise you. This story teaches us that dignity cannot be bought, that courage can change your destiny, and that sometimes standing up for yourself opens doors you never knew existed. For 7 years, Grace Mitchell gave flawless service. Every dollar Grace earned was for Noah's future. He was on a partial scholarship at a private school, with dreams of becoming a doctor. One Thursday night, everything unraveled. Eleanor Blackwood entered with her group of wealthy friends. The Blackwood name was famous in New York, a symbol of vast fortune and a darker, unspoken influence. From the start, Eleanor attacked the service, her voice loud enough for others to hear. "This table is wrong," she declared, moving perfectly placed silverware. "Where is our bread? We have waited 5 minutes." Grace appeared, holding a basket of warm bread. "Good evening, madam. I am sorry for the wait. This just came from the oven." "From the oven?" Eleanor inspected a piece like it was contaminated. "This is hard as a rock. This restaurant cannot even bake simple bread." Her friends gave nervous laughs, clearly uneasy. Grace kept her professional calm. "I can bring another type if you would like. We have several choices. Do not bother. Your incompetence has ruined my appetite." Eleanor shoved the basket away. Grace retrieved it, showing no sign of annoyance. She had handled rude people before, but this was different. This was pure cruelty. Throughout the meal, Eleanor complained about everything. The soup had too much salt. The wine was the wrong temperature. She claimed the forks were stained. Each complaint was louder and more insulting than the last. "This waitress is not properly trained," she said to her friends, making sure Grace could hear. "I am shocked she has a job." Grace felt a hot flush of shame, but she continued to serve them perfectly. She could not afford to lose this job. The evening exploded when Eleanor purposefully spilled red wine on her own white designer dress. "Look what you did!" she shrieked, aiming a finger at Grace. "You clumsy fool! You bumped into me!" "Madam, I was on the opposite side of the table," Grace said, her voice steady and clear. "I did not go near you. Are you calling me a liar?" Eleanor stood up for a dramatic display. "This dress is worth more than you make in a year." Other diners fell quiet and watched. The main hall was silent, except for the soft sound of utensils. Richard Porter, the manager, rushed to the table. Tension was etched on his face. He understood the power of the Blackwood family. He knew what they could do. Crossing them had consequences nobody wanted to face. "Madam Blackwood, please be calm. We will handle this." "Grace, apologize to her this instant," Richard ordered, his voice shaking. Grace stared at her manager, unable to believe him. After 7 years of loyal work, he was demanding she admit to a lie. "Mr. Porter, you know I did nothing." She spilled that wine on herself. "Grace," his voice cracked, "apologize now or you are fired." A look of pure triumph spread across Eleanor's face. This was her goal, to break this woman in front of everyone. "I am waiting," Eleanor said, tapping her expensive shoe. "Apologize for being incompetent." In that moment, something inside Grace snapped. It was not the humiliation. It was the brutal injustice. She had poured her life into this restaurant, and now she had to lie to protect the ego of a woman who believed money and power made her invincible. She looked at Eleanor's dinner, a plate of grilled salmon, and made a choice that would change everything. "You want my apology?" Grace asked as she lifted the plate. "Here is my apology." She then tipped the entire meal over Eleanor Blackwood's head. Sauce ran through the woman's perfect platinum hair. Vegetables slid onto her silk shoulders. A piece of salmon clung to her diamond necklace. For a few seconds, Eleanor was frozen in shock. The restaurant was completely silent. Servers stopped moving, their hands full of plates, their eyes wide with disbelief. No one had ever defied the Blackwood family. Everyone knew there would be a terrible price to pay. If you believe in standing up for yourself, tap the like button and share this story. Subscribe so you do not miss what happens when Nathaniel Blackwood sees the video of this moment. Then, Eleanor erupted. Her scream was like a crack of thunder. "How could you do this?" she wailed, sauce dripping from her chin. "I will destroy you. I will sue you until you have nothing left. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know what my family is capable of?" She turned her wild eyes on Richard Porter. "Call the police. I want her arrested. I want this restaurant shut down. All of you will suffer for this." Mr. Porter was shaking, his face as white as a napkin. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Eleanor's friends tried to clean the food off of her with their napkins. She slapped their hands away. "Do not touch me," she screamed, her furious gaze locked on Grace. But Grace felt a deep sense of calm. The chaos was outside of her. Inside, there was only a quiet stillness. She slowly untied the apron she had worn for 7 years. She folded it with care and placed it on the table. "Madam Blackwood," she said, her voice rising clearly above the whispers, "you can sue me. You can ruin my career. You can use your family's power to try and break me. But you can never take my dignity. I would rather be jobless than apologize for a lie. For 7 years, I have worked here. I have treated every guest with respect. Tonight, I learned that some people believe their money can buy another person's soul. They are mistaken." She looked at Richard Porter. "Mr. Porter, I thank you for the 7 years, but I cannot work for a place that protects bullies." Grace turned and walked away. Her spine was straight and her head was high. She crossed the marble floor with steady steps. She did not hurry. Each footstep was a declaration of her own worth. The guests watched in silence. Some looked at her with admiration. Others looked at her with fear for what would happen next to the woman who dared to challenge the powerful. Families in New York. Grace's heels tapped out a steady rhythm, the sound of a spirit that refused to be broken. In the restaurant's darkest corner, a man watched the entire scene unfold. Marcus Chen sat alone, a glass of whiskey forgotten in his hand. He was Nathaniel Blackwood's most trusted man, tasked with watching over his boss's mother. Nathaniel knew her temper often created problems. But in 10 years, Marcus had never seen anything like this. A regular person, with no influence or wealth, had challenged Eleanor Blackwood and departed with her head held high. Marcus calmly took out his phone. He had recorded everything, starting from the moment Eleanor started her attack. He sent the video to Nathaniel with a simple text. "You need to see this." Marcus then stood, leaving cash on the table. He walked out of the restaurant, heading away from Grace. Behind him, Eleanor was still shouting about lawyers and revenge. But her anger was not the most important part of the night. The real story was in the eyes of the young woman named Grace. She showed no fear and no regret. She had a fire Marcus had never seen in anyone who defied the Blackwood family. He knew Nathaniel would want to know about this woman. The moment Grace walked through the glass doors of the Monarch, she stepped onto the sidewalk. The cold November wind hit her face like an icy slap. Instantly, all the courage she showed inside the restaurant disappeared. Her legs began to tremble. It started in her knees, then spread down to her calves and ankles. She had to grab a streetlight to keep from falling onto the pavement. The adrenaline that supported her during the fight with Eleanor Blackwood was gone. It left behind an emptiness that made her feel sick. Grace took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. What did I just do? She had just poured a full plate of food on the mother of one of New York's most powerful men. She had thrown away 7 years of her career in one single moment. Her hand trembled as she pulled her phone from her pocket. The screen showed a picture of Noah in his school uniform. His smile felt like a knife in her heart. She dialed his number, and each ring felt like an hour. Noah answered after the third one. "Grace, why are you calling? Are you not done with work yet?" His voice was full of surprise. Grace bit her lip hard to stop herself from crying. "Noah, something happened at work. I am coming home early. Do not worry, I will explain when I get there." There was a pause. Then Noah's voice came back, filled with worry. "Are you okay? You sound strange." "I am fine." Grace lied, making her voice sound as normal as possible. "I am just a little tired. Continue with your homework. I will be there soon." She hung up before Noah could ask anything else. She knew that hearing his voice for another second would make her break down on the busy street. Grace walked to the bus stop, each step feeling like it was weighted with lead. She sat on the cold bench, watching taxis drive by and people hurry past in heavy coats. Life just went on around her, as if her world had not just shattered. 7 years. She had given 7 years to the monarch. 7 years of long nights and early mornings. 7 years of dealing with demanding customers. 7 years of forcing a smile when she was completely exhausted. All of it was gone, vanished over a plate of fish. The bus pulled up. Grace got on like a robot, paid her fare, and sat in the back. She looked out the window as city lights blurred past. In her head, the bills started to add up. The rent for her apartment in Brooklyn was due. This month's utilities were not paid. She still owed over $50,000 for her mother's medical treatments. Noah's school tuition, even with a scholarship, was almost $1,000 a month. And now, she was unemployed. Worse, she had angered the Blackwood family. Rumor said they could make a person vanish from the city. Who would ever hire her now? The story would get out. Everyone in the restaurant business knew each other. No one would hire someone who poured food on Eleanor Blackwood. Grace felt her throat close up. She had defended her dignity. But at what cost? What would happen to her brother, Noah? He was only 14 years old. His dream was to be a doctor. He needed a good education, and she had promised their mother she would provide for him. Tears streamed down her face, and she turned to the window so no one would see. Was she selfish? Did she choose her own pride over her brother's future? But then she saw Eleanor's smug expression as she demanded Grace kneel. She recalled the shame of being told to lie in front of everyone. She knew, if given the choice again, she would do the exact same thing. Some things are not for sale. Dignity is one of them. The bus reached her stop. Grace got off and breathed in the cold Brooklyn air. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. She did not know how she would pay the bills. But she knew she had to go home and tell Noah everything. That felt like the hardest task of all. Grace opened the door to their small apartment. The familiar smell of the vanilla candle Noah always lit filled the air. Noah was at his desk, but his books were pushed away. He had clearly been too worried to study. The second he saw Grace, he jumped up. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, checking for any harm. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice strained with worry. "Tell me what happened. Did someone hurt you?" Grace studied her brother. He was only 14, but already nearly her height. His face still had a boyish softness, but his eyes were old, worn down by the losses they had shared. She hung her coat on a hook and sank onto the worn sofa, patting the space next to her. "Sit with me," she said gently. "I need to tell you what happened." Noah sat beside her, his body rigid with tension. Grace took a shaky breath and started. She explained everything. She described Eleanor Blackwood's arrival, the entitled attitude, and the escalating insults. She told him how Eleanor had intentionally spilled wine on herself and then blamed Grace. She recounted how Richard Porter demanded an apology, giving her an impossible choice between her dignity and her job. Finally, she described pouring the salmon plate over the woman's head. When she finished, the apartment was silent. Noah stared ahead, his jaw tight. His eyes went dark in a way she knew meant he was bottling up anger and fear. "You're fired," Noah stated. It was not a question. "Yes," Grace confirmed. "But how will we live?" Noah's voice trembled. "We have rent next month. My school fees, the hospital bills." Grace's chest ached as he listed the heavy burdens a boy his age should never have to carry. "I will find a new job," she promised, trying to sound confident. "I have 7 years of experience. Someone will give me a chance." "But you angered the Blackwoods," Noah said flatly. "Everyone knows their name. No one will hire someone they despise." Grace had no response. She knew he was right. Then Noah turned and looked directly at her. His expression was not one of fear or disappointment, but something that stunned her. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice firm. "That woman had no right to treat you that way. Nobody can force you to apologize for a lie." Grace started to speak, but he interrupted her. "Remember what Mom taught us?" Noah asked. "She always said you can earn back money, but you can never get back your self-respect. She said it is better to be poor than to be a coward." Tears welled in Grace's eyes at the mention of their mother. She could picture her in that hospital bed, weakened by treatment, yet still insisting they live with their heads held high. "I worry I was selfish," Grace whispered. "My pride might make you suffer." Noah shook his head fiercely. "I would rather drop out of school than see you humiliated," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I would eat instant noodles for every meal. I would do anything before I let you bow to a person like that. You have raised me for the last 3 years. You gave up everything for me. I am proud of you. My sister does not kneel to injustice." Grace could no longer hold back her tears. She pulled Noah into a tight embrace, clinging to him. He hugged her back, his own shoulders shaking as he began to cry. They held each other in their small apartment as the Manhattan lights glowed outside. They had no money, no connections, and no power, but they had each other. In that moment, Grace knew it was enough. "We will be all right," she whispered. "I am not sure how, but we will make it." Noah nodded against her shoulder. "I know we will," he replied, "as long as we are together." That night, they slept on the sofa, just as they had after their mother died, unable to face being alone. Grace had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Sunlight piercing through a crack in the curtains woke Grace from a troubled sleep. Noah was still asleep beside her, his quiet breathing filling the room. Grace slipped away to make coffee, trying to ignore the crushing weight of their situation. Her phone suddenly buzzed, showing a call from Diane, her best friend from the Monarch. Grace took a breath and answered. "Grace, are you online?" Diane's voice was rushed and out of breath. "You need to see this. Your video is everywhere." "What video?" Grace's heart began to race. "The video from last night," Diane exclaimed. "Someone filmed the entire incident. It has gone viral, millions of views. The hashtag #BraveGirl is trending #1. Grace almost dropped her phone. She opened her social media and stared in disbelief. The clip of her pouring food on Eleanor Blackwood had over 5 million views, and the number was rising every second. Comments and private messages were flooding in. "You are a hero," one message read. "Someone finally stood up to those arrogant rich people." "I would have done the same thing," another wrote. "Dignity is not for sale." But many people disagreed. "That was unprofessional," an account commented. "A server never has the right to assault a customer, no matter how difficult they are." "She deserved to be fired and will never work again." The internet was divided. Supporters called Grace a hero for fighting classism. Critics called her impulsive and foolish for ruining her own future. But everyone agreed on one point: the girl had courage. Grace kept scrolling until her heart stopped. She saw comments mentioning the Blackwood family by name. She was finished. That was the consensus online. People said she had no idea who the Blackwoods were. They were not a family that forgave. And she had publicly humiliated Nathaniel Blackwood's mother. Someone posted a prayer for her. But this story was not just for common people. It echoed in places without bright lights. In the private rooms of elite clubs and secret meetings of the criminal world, the waitress who fought the Blackwoods became a myth. A casino boss whispered to his partner about it. He said a girl had dumped a full plate of food on Eleanor Blackwood in a crowded restaurant. His partner called it madness. Did she not know about Eleanor's late husband? Did she not know the power her son now controlled? Or perhaps she knew, and that made her even more terrifying. In the New York underworld, courage earned respect, but foolishness earned contempt. No one could decide which category Grace Mitchell belonged to. Some wagered she would be gone in a week. Others believed the Blackwoods would use her to make a brutal point. But everyone knew one thing. For the first time in many years, someone had dared to shame the most powerful family in the city. Grace sat in her small kitchen. She stared at her phone, feeling like she was watching another person's life collapse. She never wanted this attention. She only wanted her dignity. But it was too late now. The world knew her name, and more importantly, the Blackwoods knew it too. Her son, Noah, woke up and rubbed his eyes. "What are you looking at?" he asked. Grace had no answer for him. She did not know that across the city, a man was watching the same video on a loop. His expression was impossible to understand. The penthouse at the top of Blackwood Tower was like a throne room overlooking Manhattan. Morning sunlight streamed through massive, reinforced windows. The space was filled with dark, expensive furniture and priceless art. Nathaniel Blackwood stood before the glass wall, a cup of black coffee in his hand. At 36, he commanded the empire his father had built over a lifetime. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair combed back perfectly. His face was all sharp angles, with a jaw that looked like it was cut from granite. His eyes were the color of a cold winter sky. To the public, he was a genius hotel and real estate mogul. In the underworld, his name made powerful men bow their heads. He was not like his father. He did not enjoy public displays of force. He preferred silence and strategy. His enemies were often defeated before they even knew they were at war. A knock came from the door. Nathaniel did not turn. He knew who it was. "Come in, Marcus," he said. His voice was deep and steady. Marcus Chen entered the room. His black suit was perfect. His face was a calm mask, perfected over 10 years as Nathaniel's right hand. "Boss, I have something," Marcus said. He placed his phone on a glass table. "I sent this video to you last night. You may not have seen it." Nathaniel turned. A single eyebrow rose. "What video?" "About your mother," Marcus answered. "There was an incident at the Monarch last night." Nathaniel put his coffee down. He walked to the table and picked up the phone. He pressed play. The room became silent as the video showed the scene. Nathaniel watched the entire thing without a word, his face showing nothing. When it finished, he did not speak. He just moved the timeline back to the beginning and watched it again. And again. Marcus stood by, hiding his curiosity. He had prepared for rage. He expected an order to find the waitress and destroy her, but that command never came. On the fifth viewing, Nathaniel suddenly stopped the video. He zoomed in on a single moment. It was right before Grace lifted the plate. She was looking directly into Eleanor's eyes, completely without fear. "What do you see there?" Marcus finally asked, breaking the silence. Nathaniel did not answer immediately. He stared at the screen, at the eyes of this stranger who defied his mother, his family, and the power everyone else respected. Then something happened that Marcus had never seen before. Nathaniel smiled. It was not his cold, business smile. It was not the polite one he used for partners. This was a real smile, filled with genuine amusement and maybe even respect. "She is not scared," Nathaniel said. His voice had a new tone Marcus had never heard. "My mother is threatening her. The manager is about to fire her. The entire room is watching her. And she is not afraid." She knows who we are, but she stands tall for what she believes is right. Marcus just nodded. She is either incredibly brave or completely insane, Nathaniel continued. Or both. And he found that fascinating. His whole life, Nathaniel had watched people bow to the Blackwood name. Politicians, business titans, men the world called strong. They all bent before him. He was tired of the fear in their eyes. He was tired of the fake respect from cowards. But this girl, a simple waitress with nothing, had stood up and done what none of them would ever dare. Nathaniel put the phone down and looked at Marcus. I want to know everything about her, he said. Her full name, where she lives, her history. Everything. Right away, boss, Marcus replied. But may I ask what you plan to do with her? Nathaniel turned back to the window. He looked down at the city far below. I do not know yet, he said, but a person who can face the Blackwood family without flinching. That is someone I need to meet. She is unlike anyone else, and that has made me curious. Marcus left to follow his orders. Nathaniel was alone again in the giant penthouse. He played the video one last time. He focused on the moment Grace walked out of the restaurant, her head held high. Something about her calm in that chaos kept him watching. For the first time in a long while, Nathaniel Blackwood felt a stir of something he thought was long gone from his life. Less than an hour after Marcus departed, Nathaniel's phone rang. The screen showed it was his mother. He knew this would not be a pleasant call. He took a breath and answered. Nathaniel. Eleanor's voice was sharp. Did you see the video? Did you see what that woman did to me? I saw it, he replied calmly. Then why are you doing nothing? Eleanor nearly shouted. Find that girl. Ruin her. I want her blacklisted from every job in this country. I want her to get on her knees and beg me for forgiveness in front of the world. I want her to learn what happens when you cross the Blackwood family. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Are you listening to me, Nathaniel? She asked. I am, he said, and my answer is no. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Then Eleanor spoke again, her voice low and dangerous. What did you just say? I said no, Mother, Nathaniel repeated, his tone unchanged. I will not ruin her. Eleanor let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh. You are protecting a server who assaulted your own mother? Have you lost your mind, Nathaniel? The whole world is laughing at our family because of that video. And you will do nothing? Our family's reputation or yours? Nathaniel asked. From what I saw, you started the conflict. You belittled her for hours. You spilled wine on your own dress and blamed her for it. You demanded she kneel for a crime she did not commit. And when she refused to be broken, you called it an attack on our family. Nathaniel Blackwood, Eleanor gasped, her voice shaking with rage. How dare you speak to me that way? I am only telling you the truth, Mother. And the truth is that you were wrong. I have ignored your poor treatment of staff for too long. I have pretended not to see you humiliate people you think are beneath you. But I cannot ignore this. That girl did nothing wrong. She was only defending her own dignity. Dignity? Eleanor scoffed. A poor waitress has no dignity next to our family. She is a human being, Mother, Nathaniel said. His voice grew colder. And that is something you seem to have forgotten. You have been surrounded by wealth and power for so long that you forget the people serving you are also human. They have lives. They have pride. They are not toys for you to break when you are bored. You are choosing a waitress over your own mother, Eleanor said. Eleanor screamed, her voice filled with fury. I am choosing what is right over what is wrong, Nathaniel said calmly. If you cannot see that, it is your problem, not mine. Fine, she shot back, her tone now a weapon. I will do it myself. I have enough power to ruin that girl's life. I will teach her the cost of angering a Blackwood. You will do nothing, Nathaniel's voice turned to ice. This is not a request, Mother. It is an order. Do not touch her. Do not touch her family. If you disobey me, you will answer to the head of this family, not your son. A heavy silence fell between them. In all his 36 years, Nathaniel had never threatened his mother with his power. Something between them had just broken forever. "You will regret this," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with rage. She hung up. He stood alone in his penthouse looking at the phone. He had protected a stranger over his own mother, and felt no regret. 3 days passed. Grace visited 17 restaurants across the city. The result was always the same crushing defeat. The interviews always started with hope. Managers saw her 7 years of experience and were ready to hire her. Then they asked for her name. The moment she said Grace Mitchell, everything changed. Their smiles disappeared. Their eyes went cold. The excuses were always polite, but firm. "We will call you," they would say, but she knew they never would. "The job is already filled," they lied, as the hiring sign stayed in the window. "You are not a good fit for us." By the 17th rejection, Grace was too tired to pretend. A manager in a small diner finally told her the truth. "Miss Mitchell," he said softly, "no one will hire you. Your name is on a blacklist because of Mrs. Blackwood. That family can close any business with a single call. I have a family. I cannot take that risk." Grace walked out of the diner, her legs feeling heavy. Noah had warned her this would happen, but hearing it out loud felt like a blow she could not absorb. When she got home, she looked at her bank account. The number was shrinking fast. Rent was paid for this month, but not the next. The medical bills were due in 2 weeks. Noah's school fees had to be paid in 1 month. Her savings would last maybe 6 weeks if she spent nothing. But what happened after that? 6 years would not make a difference if no one gave her a job. Noah saw his sister's pain, even as she tried to hide it. He saw her leave at 5 in the morning and return with tired red eyes. He saw her staring at bills late at night. He did not ask questions. Instead, he ate less for breakfast. He said his school offered free lunch. He turned off his lights early. He secretly searched for part-time jobs online, knowing Grace would disapprove. On the third night, Grace sat alone in their small apartment. It was the only home they had left after their parents died. It was modest, but it was theirs. Now, she was thinking about selling it. Selling it would pay the debt and keep Noah in school. But it would also mean losing the last connection to her parents. Losing the memory of her mother's laugh in that room. She dropped her head on the table, shaking with exhaustion. The fight to keep her dignity was costing her everything. On the morning of the fourth day, Grace left with a new plan to search for jobs in other states, where the Blackwood name might not be so powerful. She locked her door and froze. A shining black Maybach was parked in front of her building. It looked completely out of place in her simple neighborhood. A car like that was worth $500,000, 10 times more than her apartment. The door opened and a man in a perfect black suit stepped out. Grace knew him immediately from the pictures she had seen online. It was Marcus Chen, Nathaniel Blackwood's most trusted man. People whispered he once made a whole gang disappear overnight. Grace backed away, her body hitting the door. They had come for her. This was the end she had been dreading. "Miss Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly calm, "I am not here to cause you harm." Grace said nothing, her eyes searching for any way to escape. She knew running was pointless against a man like Marcus Chen. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. Grace held her breath. But he did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small black business card with gold letters. He stepped closer, but kept a respectful distance, and held it out. "Nathaniel Blackwood would like to see you." Grace stared at the card like it was a viper. "See me for what?" she asked, her voice strained. "To threaten me in person this time?" "No," Marcus said simply. "Mr. Blackwood just wants to talk." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Talk? The son of the woman I humiliated wants to talk? Do you think I am a fool?" Marcus did not seem bothered by her anger. His expression was unreadable. "Miss Mitchell, If he wanted to hurt you, he would not send me with a card. The Blackwood name can open any door in this city, but it can also close them. You have already learned that. Grace flinched. They had been watching her. So, if it is not a threat, what is it? She asked, still on guard. I do not know, Marcus replied honestly. Mr. Blackwood did not tell me. To explain why. He simply said he wishes to meet with you. I was told to make it clear this is an invitation, not an order. You are free to decline. Grace searched Marcus's face for any hint of a lie, but his expression was professionally blank. And if I decline? She asked. Then I will leave, and you will not be bothered again, Marcus replied. But Miss Mitchell, I can tell you this. I have served the Blackwood family for over 10 years. This is the first time Nathaniel has ever asked me to extend a personal invitation. He is normally indifferent to anyone outside his business. You have captured his interest, and that is a rare thing. Grace accepted the card. Her fingers trembled against the cool, heavy paper. The address was for Blackwood Tower, a building she had seen from a distance but never dreamed she would enter. When? She asked, surprised at her own willingness to consider it. At your convenience, Marcus said, nodding toward the Maybach. However, if you are willing, I can take you there now. Grace glanced at her apartment door. She thought of Noah, the unpaid bills, and her uncertain future. She had nothing more to lose. Everything was already lost. Fine, she said, unsure if she was walking into a trap or seizing a strange opportunity. I need 5 minutes to send my brother a text message. The Maybach moved silently through the city streets, taking Grace from her modest Brooklyn neighborhood to the heart of Manhattan's power. Marcus was silent for the whole drive, and Grace was not in the mood to speak. She watched the tall buildings pass by like a strange dream and questioned what she was doing. When the car pulled up to Blackwood Tower, Grace had to lean her head all the way back just to see the top. 72 floors of glass and steel shot into the sky like a giant blade. The sunlight reflecting off it was so bright it was painful. This building was a symbol of Blackwood authority, a quiet statement that the family was above everyone else. Marcus guided her through the main lobby. The polished black marble floors mirrored their reflections. Employees in sharp uniforms nodded at Marcus as they walked by, their curious glances at Grace carefully concealed. A private elevator took them to the 72nd floor. Grace's ears popped from the sudden change in pressure. When the doors slid open, she entered another reality. The penthouse was enormous, with high ceilings and glass walls offering a view over all of Manhattan. The decor was dark and expensive, with art that cost millions and antiques that belonged in a museum. The very air felt different, thick with power and menace. Wait here, Marcus instructed, before he vanished through a large oak door. Grace stood alone, feeling completely out of place. She did not sit on the rich leather furniture or touch any of the priceless objects. She just stood perfectly still. My heart pounded like a drum against my ribs. Then I heard footsteps. Nathaniel Blackwood emerged from the same door Marcus had just vanished through. I instantly saw why people were so afraid of him. It was not just his height, though he was a full head taller than me. It was not his face, which was all sharp angles and cold stone. It was his eyes. They were gray, like a winter storm, and sharp enough to cut right through me. They felt like they could read every secret I had. These were the eyes of a man who had witnessed too much and done too much to be bothered by anything. Miss Mitchell, he said. His voice was quiet and deep, like a river moving under a sheet of ice. Thank you for coming. I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my voice steady. I am not sure I had a choice, Mr. Blackwood. He tilted his head. Something flickered in his gaze, but it was gone before I could understand it. You had a choice, he said. Marcus told you this was an invitation, it was not a command. Then why bring me here? I asked, losing my patience. Did you want to tell me personally that you planned to destroy my life for insulting your mother? He did not answer right away. He walked over to the large window and stared down at Manhattan, which looked so small beneath him. I have reviewed the video several times, he said, his back still to me. There is one thing that I do not get. What? I asked. Why did you do it? He turned to face me. You knew who my mother was. You understood what my family is capable of. You knew you would lose your job and be blacklisted from this industry. You understood all of that, yet you still did it. Why? I met his cold, gray stare. But strangely, I did not feel the terror I expected. I suppose I had already lost so much that there was nothing left to fear. Because I am not a doormat for people to wipe their feet on, I said. My voice was clear and strong in the huge room. Your mother is wealthy and powerful. This whole city might fear her, but that does not give her the right to humiliate me. It does not allow her to force me to my knees to apologize for a wrong I did not commit. I may be poor. I may only be a waitress. No one knows my name. But I am a human being, and my dignity is not for sale, no matter the price. The room was completely silent after I finished. Nathaniel stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on mine, but I could see something shifting in his gaze, like a tiny crack forming in the ice he had built around himself. You know, he said after a long moment, I have met thousands of people in my life. I have met politicians and executives, the people the world calls powerful. Every single one of them bows to my family. They would all sell their souls for the smallest advantage. But you, a simple waitress, you dared to stand tall and say no. You were willing to give up everything to protect something that most people do not even realize they have lost. Self-respect. He paused. What he did next took me completely by surprise. He smiled. It was not a cold or mocking smile. It was genuine, and it changed his entire face, making him look younger, more human. And that makes me very curious about you, Miss Mitchell, Nathaniel said. The smile vanished as quickly as it appeared, and his cold mask returned. He walked to a desk made of dark oak, pulled out a file, and placed it on the table in front of me. I have a proposal for you, he said. I looked at the folder, my suspicion obvious. What kind of proposal? Do you know the Sterling? He asked. I nodded. Everyone in the restaurant business knew the Sterling. It was a five-star restaurant inside the Blackwood Grand Hotel, right in the heart of Manhattan. One dinner there cost more than I made in a month at the Monarch. The manager of the Sterling recently resigned, Nathaniel continued. I need a replacement, and I want you for the job. I was certain I had misheard him. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Nathaniel Blackwood, whose mother I had covered in food, was offering me the top job at one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. Is this a joke? I finally asked. I do not joke, he replied, especially about my business. But why? I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. I publicly embarrassed your mother. That video is everywhere. My name is being ruined in this industry. And you want to hire me? None of this makes sense. He watched me for a long time before he spoke. You have 7 years of experience with a perfect record, not one complaint against you. That is unusual. And you have a quality I want in a manager that I can rarely find. What is that? A spine, Nathaniel said. You are someone who will defend what is right, even when it costs you. That is the kind of person I need. Someone who will not bend to wealthy customers when they are being unreasonable. Someone who values standards over money. The Sterling needs a person like that. I still could not believe him. And your mother? She will never allow this. My mother does not get to make decisions for me, Nathaniel said, his tone turning colder at the mention of Eleanor. This is my company, not hers. I looked at the folder, opened it, and almost gasped when I saw the salary. It was 5 times what I had earned at the Monarch. It was enough to clear our medical debt in just 2 years. It was enough for Noah to continue his studies without financial worry. It was enough for a comfortable life I never thought possible. But I knew that nothing this good ever comes for free, especially from a man like him. "What do you really want from me?" I asked, looking directly into his eyes. "No one gives something for nothing, especially not you. What is the real cost? What do you expect me to do for this job? Clean your money, hide your illegal dealings, or something even worse?" He did not seem insulted by my directness. Instead, he looked at me again, his sharp eyes scanning my face. "You truly are not afraid of anything, are you?" he said. It was a statement, not a question. "I have lost too much to fear losing anything else," I told him. "But I will not sell my soul. I would rather be blacklisted forever than be a part of a crime. If that is your price, then you picked the wrong person." Nathaniel paused, considering her words. He gave a slow nod, as if finding a solution to a complex problem. "Good," he said. "Here is the arrangement. You will operate the Sterling as a legitimate restaurant. No secret accounts, no hidden activities. Your only goal is to make it the best it can possibly be. That is all." "And my terms," Grace stated. "I will not compromise my principles. I will treat all staff with respect, regardless of the client. If you command me to do something I find morally wrong, I will say no, even if it means losing this position." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, clearly unused to being given conditions. "Are you trying to bargain with me?" "I am establishing my boundaries," Grace answered. "They are not up for discussion." A tense silence stretched between them. They stared at each other like two fighters taking measure before a match. Then Nathaniel let out a short, quiet laugh, as if it escaped against his will. "You are certainly different," he admitted. "Very well. I accept your terms. You will have total control to run the Sterling your way. I will not meddle in daily affairs. If a problem arises, you bring it directly to me." He extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement, Miss Mitchell?" Grace looked at his hand. It belonged to a man feared across New York, a man rumored to have done awful things, but it also represented a chance to rebuild her life and Noah's, an opportunity she knew might never come again. She reached out and shook his hand. "We have an agreement, Mr. Blackwood." His grip was warm and firm, strong enough to convey commitment, but gentle enough not to cause pain. The moment they touched, Grace felt a change in the air. A new path had opened before her, one with an unknown destination. "Call me Nathaniel," he said. Grace nodded. "Then you should call me Grace." Her first 2 weeks at the Sterling were the most challenging of her life. The staff eyed her with deep suspicion. They whispered about the viral video, wondering why Nathaniel Blackwood hired her. Some assumed she was his mistress. Others believed she was a pawn to upset his mother. Grace ignored the gossip. She poured her energy into her work, following the principles she had learned over 7 years at the Monarch. She believed everyone deserved dignity, from the head chef to the person washing dishes. She held individual meetings with every employee, listening to their problems and learning about their families. She adjusted schedules to help parents with young children. She extended break times, improved the quality of staff meals, and most importantly, defended her team from abusive guests. One night, a drunk businessman screamed at a young server until she cried because an appetizer was 2 minutes late. Grace calmly approached and asked him to leave. He threatened to call Nathaniel Blackwood. Grace smiled and invited him to do so, before personally showing him the door. The story moved quickly through the restaurant. After that night, the staff's opinion of her transformed. They no longer saw her as an outsider. They saw her as a true leader, someone who would protect them. The Sterling's revenue began to climb. The reason was simple. A happy team provides better service, and satisfied customers return. 5-star reviews appeared on websites. Guests praised the food and the professional, welcoming atmosphere. Nathaniel Blackwood started visiting more often. He would claim he was inspecting operations, sitting at his usual table with a glass of whiskey, watching her work. But soon his visits grew longer. Business checks slowly became quiet conversations. They usually happened after the restaurant closed. When the staff had all left, Grace would make coffee for herself and pour Nathaniel a whiskey. They would sit at a table overlooking the glittering lights of Manhattan. They discussed work and life, and their different views on the world. Nathaniel wanted to know about Noah and how she had raised him alone for 3 years. He asked about the medical debt she was still paying for her parents. Grace asked about the Blackwood Empire and the burden of leading such a powerful family. She could see the loneliness hidden behind his cold expression. What surprised Nathaniel most was her honesty. She never hesitated to speak her mind. If she thought a business decision was a mistake, she told him. When he acted arrogant or distant, she pointed it out. Once, Nathaniel complained that a partner had declined his offer. His voice held a clear threat. Grace put her coffee down and met his gaze. "People are allowed to say no," she said. "Even to Nathaniel Blackwood. Disagreement is not an insult. It just means someone has another perspective. A good leader should listen to that perspective, not threaten the person who offers it." Anyone else would have faced severe consequences for such words. But with Grace, he just sat in silence for a long time. Then he gave a slow nod. "You are right," he admitted. It was the first time in his life Nathaniel Blackwood had ever said he was wrong. Marcus Chen, who was always present, watched from a corner in disbelief. He had served Nathaniel for over 10 years. He had seen his boss handle rivals, allies, and women who wanted his wealth. But he had never seen him like this. He had never seen him truly listen to someone, or laugh so freely, or share things he had kept locked away. Grace Mitchell was reaching the real man behind the mask. Marcus was not sure if this was a good thing, but he knew for certain that things were changing, and when things changed for Nathaniel Blackwood, the entire city would feel it. One Friday evening, Noah appeared at the Sterling unexpectedly. Grace was reviewing weekend reservations when her 14-year-old brother walked in, carrying his backpack. "Grace, I came to get you," Noah said with a smile. "I finished my test early and wanted to surprise you." Grace started toward him for a hug, but then she saw Nathaniel at his corner table. His gray eyes were fixed on Noah with clear curiosity. Noah saw the stranger too. He stopped and moved closer to his sister, his guard immediately up. "Who is that, Grace?" Grace took a breath, unsure of how to make the introduction. "This is Nathaniel Blackwood, the owner," she explained. "And this is my brother, Noah." Noah's eyes went wide when he heard the name Blackwood. He instantly connected this man to the woman from the viral video. He stared at Nathaniel with caution, his body tensing as if to shield his sister. But Nathaniel did not seem threatening. He stood and approached them, his expression softening. "So this is the brother Grace is always talking about," he said. "She mentioned you want to be a doctor." Noah remained silent, still trying to understand the man before him. He then raised his chin and met Nathaniel's gaze with a bravery that seemed beyond his 14 years. "Yes, I want to be a doctor to help people like my mom, people who cannot afford the proper care." Nathaniel tilted his head, and a flicker of something moved in his cold eyes. "That is a worthy goal," he said. "How are your grades?" "I am first in my class," Noah said with simple honesty. "I have a partial scholarship now, and I plan to earn a full one for college. My sister will not have to worry about me." I watched my brother, my chest swelling with pride. He had been forced to grow up too fast over the past 3 years. He had endured so much loss, yet never lost his hope. Nathaniel observed us for a moment, then looked at me. "You should take your brother home," he said. "We have nothing more to discuss tonight." I nodded my thanks and walked Noah out of the restaurant. On the way home, Noah was quiet for a long time. "The way he looks at you is strange," he finally said. "Strange how?" I asked. "I am not sure how to describe it," Noah said with a shrug. "But I have never seen anyone look at you that way. Like you are the most important thing in the world." I did not reply, but I felt my cheeks grow warm in the darkness. A week later, Noah burst into our apartment, his face in shock. "Grace!" he yelled. "The school called me to the office. They said someone paid my tuition for the rest of high school. They would not tell me who, but they said I do not have to worry about money anymore. I can just study. I knew at once who it was. That night, I worked later than usual at the Sterling, waiting for Nathaniel. When he came in and sat at his regular table, I brought him his whiskey and sat down opposite him. "Why did you do it?" I asked without preamble. Nathaniel did not act like he was confused. "Because the boy deserves it," he answered. "And because I could." "I do not need your charity," I said, my voice sharp. "It is not charity," Nathaniel said, meeting my gaze. "It is an investment. I invest in people who I believe will accomplish something important. Noah will be a fine doctor. I am sure of it." I wanted to fight back, to tell him I did not need his help, but when I looked into his gray eyes, I saw something that stopped me. There was no pity, no effort to control me. There was only a sincerity I had never seen from him before. "Thank you," I finally said. The two words felt small, but they carried all the things I could not say. We sat and talked all night, for longer than we ever had. Nathaniel told me about his father, the man who built the Blackwood Empire from nothing. He was also the man who taught Nathaniel that emotion was a weakness. "He never hugged me," Nathaniel said, his voice low in the quiet room. "He never told me he loved me. He only gave me lessons on power and survival. When he died, I was not sure if I felt sad. I only knew I had to take his place. I had to become the man he wanted me to be. I told him about my parents. I told him about the happy years and the shock of my mother's cancer. I told him about the nights I spent in the hospital holding her hand. I told him about the car crash that took them both away. They spoke of how a single event could reshape a person's life. Grace mentioned the mark on her wrist. It was a reminder of a violent past she had to escape to find her peace. She showed Nathaniel the scar, and a cold fury entered his eyes. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice like steel. "It does not matter," Grace said. "That life is over. I survived." Nathaniel said nothing more. His finger traced the scar on her skin, so gently it was as if she might break. In that moment, Grace saw a side of Nathaniel Blackwood she never knew existed. She saw kindness. They talked as the sky over the city turned from black to dawn. By the time they left, an unspoken bond had formed between them. It connected two solitary people in a city of millions. News of Grace's new position at the Sterling eventually reached Eleanor. Sophia Harrington told her after seeing Grace managing the restaurant. Sophia's phone call was filled with spite. "Eleanor," she said, "your son promoted that waitress. He visits her nearly every day. The whole city thinks they are together." Eleanor almost broke her phone. She had believed Nathaniel's interest was a passing phase, but this was a defiant act she could not ignore. The Sterling was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon when its doors opened. Eleanor Blackwood entered the room. She wore an expensive black dress, her hair perfectly styled. Each click of her heels on the marble floor was a threat. Grace was inspecting tables for a banquet that night. She froze when she saw the woman who haunted her dreams. "So this is the girl who has my son under her spell," Eleanor announced. Her voice echoed, and the staff stopped their work to watch. "I must say, you are more clever than I imagined. You not only threw food on me, you found your way into my son's life." Grace felt a flush of anger but kept her composure. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said evenly, "please exit my restaurant." "Your restaurant?" Eleanor laughed with pure disdain. "This restaurant belongs to the Blackwood family. It belongs to my son. You are just an employee playing a part." Some of the staff stared, their mouths open. Grace moved forward until she stood directly in front of Eleanor. She did not yield an inch, even though this woman could destroy her. "I will say it again," Grace said with clarity. "Please leave now." Eleanor stepped closer, her eyes full of venom. "Who do you believe you are?" Eleanor whispered so only Grace could hear. "Do you think Nathaniel actually cares for you? You are just a tool he is using to defy me. When he is done with you, You will be nothing again, and I will make certain you never recover. That goes for your little brother, too. I hear he attends a private school and wants to be a doctor. It would be a tragedy if that dream was crushed. Grace felt her blood run cold at the mention of Noah. She could take any attack on herself, but her brother was a line that could not be crossed. If you harm my brother, Grace said, her voice trembling with rage, not fear, I promise you. What will you do? Eleanor mocked. Throw another dinner plate at me. Just then, the restaurant doors flew open. Nathaniel entered, his face a mask of ice. Marcus followed close behind, having clearly warned him. Mother, Nathaniel said. The single word was a thunderclap. Eleanor turned to her son with a smile fixed on her face. Nathaniel, perfect timing. I was just speaking with your new manager. Come outside with me, Nathaniel commanded. His tone allowed no argument. Eleanor gave Grace one last hateful look and followed him out. Their fight started instantly on the sidewalk. You went too far, Nathaniel stated. I told you to leave her alone. She is manipulating you, Eleanor yelled. I am protecting you. You are protecting your own pride, he answered coldly. Grace is not using me. She has never asked me for anything. She is the only one who speaks to me honestly. She is the only one who sees a person, not a crime boss or a bank account. And what am I to you? Eleanor asked, her voice shaking with hurt and fury. For 36 years, you have tried to run my life, Nathaniel said plainly. You never cared what I wanted, only what you thought I should be. Now I have found someone important to me, and you want to ruin it. Eleanor was speechless. Her son had never spoken to her this way. Listen to me, Mother. Nathaniel moved closer, his voice a low threat. If you lay a hand on Grace or Noah, I will cut you out of my life. I will block your access to all family money. I will destroy your social standing. And you know I am not making an idle threat. Eleanor looked into her son's eyes and saw that he was completely serious. This was not a moment of anger. This was a final decision. You will regret this, she said, but her confidence was gone. No, Mother, Nathaniel said. I only regret that I did not do this years ago. He turned and went back inside, leaving Eleanor alone on the street. For the first time, she understood she could actually lose her son. Eleanor Blackwood did not accept defeat. She returned home full of rage after the argument. Her own son had defended a waitress against her. He had threatened his own mother for a woman Eleanor felt was worthless. Eleanor sat alone in her vast mansion, surrounded by empty liquor glasses. In that drunken fog, she made a choice that would haunt her forever. She dialed the number for Viktor Volkov, the head of the Russian crime family and a direct rival to the Blackwoods. The two families had maintained a tense standoff for years. A Cold War started in Nathaniel's father's time. Each side was waiting for the perfect moment to strike a final blow. Her voice, thick with alcohol, slurred into the phone. Victor, I have something for you. My son has a weakness. It is a waitress, Grace Mitchell, and her little brother. Nathaniel values them above all else. If you need leverage, they are your key. Eleanor gave no thought to the consequences, no thought to betraying her own son. She just wanted Grace gone. 3 days later, Noah disappeared. He never came home from school. Grace called his phone over and over, hearing only the empty ring. The school confirmed he left at 3 in the afternoon, right on time. His friends had not seen him after the final bell. An hour passed, then 2. Panic began to set in. Grace ran through the streets, questioning neighbors and shopkeepers, desperate for anyone who might have seen her brother. No one knew anything. At 8 that night, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a strange number. The photo inside made her heart stop. Noah was tied to a wooden chair. Tape sealed his mouth and his eyes were wide with terror. A simple message glowed beneath the image. Tell your lover we need to talk. If you call the police, the boy is dead. Grace's legs gave out, and she crumpled to the floor. There were no tears, no screams. She just trembled. staring at the picture of her brother, feeling her entire world fall apart. For the first time since her parents died 3 years ago, Grace felt completely helpless. She did not know what to do or who to call. She had no way to save her brother from these monsters. Her hands shaking, she dialed Nathaniel. He picked up on the first ring. His voice was filled with concern when he heard her frantic breathing. "Grace, what happened?" "They took Noah," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They sent a picture. I do not know what to do. Please, Nathaniel. What am I going to do? Where are you?" Nathaniel's voice instantly turned to ice. "I am at home. Stay there. Do not move. I am on my way." He hung up and faced Marcus, his expression colder than his right-hand man had ever seen. The usual calm in his gray eyes was gone, replaced by a brutal, focused rage. "Volkov," Nathaniel said. The single word was enough. Marcus nodded. He knew the Volkov family was the only group reckless enough for this, and they must have had inside help. "Get everyone," Nathaniel commanded. "I want you to find that boy. Find him in the next hour. Call every contact we have. Offer them any amount of money they want. And tell our men to get ready. There will be blood tonight." Marcus immediately began making calls. In just 15 minutes, the whole Blackwood criminal empire was on alert. Enforcers assembled from across the city. Weapons were distributed. Vehicles were prepared. This was not about business. This was war. Nathaniel arrived at Grace's apartment in minutes. He found her on the living room floor, her gaze fixed on the photo of Noah. He knelt before her and took her shaking shoulders in his hands. "Grace, look at me," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I am going to bring Noah back. I promise you. No one touches what is mine and gets away with it." She looked at him, her eyes red but tearless. "I cannot lose him," she whispered. "He is all I have. If something happens to him, I will not survive." "You will not lose him," Nathaniel said, his hand on her cheek. "I will burn this city to the ground before I let that happen." Just then, Marcus's phone rang. He listened, then looked at Nathaniel. "We have them," he said. "An old warehouse on the Brooklyn docks. At least 10 guards are present." Nathaniel stood up, his face becoming a mask of cold fury. "Tonight, the Volkov family would learn why you never touch the people Nathaniel Blackwood protects." The Brooklyn docks were consumed by midnight darkness, with only a few streetlights casting a pale glow on the water. The abandoned warehouse was an old brick building from another era. Tonight, it held the men who had made a terrible mistake. A line of black cars stopped 300 meters away, their engines silent. Nathaniel stepped out, his tailored black suit a strange sight for the violence to come. Marcus stood beside him and offered him a pistol. Nathaniel checked the clip and slid it into his waistband. His cold gray eyes scanned the building ahead. 12 men, Marcus reported quietly. 4 outside, 8 inside. The boy is on the second floor, in the northeast corner. Nathaniel gave a sharp nod. "I want one of them alive," he said, his voice flat. "The others are disposable." 20 of Blackwood's men moved like ghosts in the darkness, surrounding the warehouse. The 4 guards outside were eliminated silently, their throats cut before they could even whisper for help. Nathaniel led the charge, kicking the heavy iron door from its frame and entering like a storm. The warehouse erupted with gunfire. Every shot from his team was deliberate and deadly. Nathaniel moved with a chilling calm, dropping a man who aimed at him and then putting 2 bullets into another attacker's chest. He was not the best marksman, but he was the most ruthless. There was no hesitation, no mercy. This was the other Nathaniel Blackwood, the one he hid behind polite society and expensive dinners. This was the monster his father made. The entire operation took less than 10 minutes. 8 men were dead on the concrete floor, their blood pooling in the dark. 1 remained alive, shot in the leg by Marcus, and now bound for questioning. Nathaniel took the stairs to the second floor, his steps heavy on the old wood. He kicked open the door to the corner room and saw Noah. The boy was still tied to the chair, but his eyes widened with relief at the sight of Nathaniel. Nathaniel moved quickly, gently removing the tape from Noah's mouth before cutting the ropes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice now incredibly soft. "I am okay," Noah replied, his own voice shaking a little. "They just made threats. Where is Grace? She is safe at home, waiting for you." Nathaniel helped Noah stand. "I am taking you to her now." Suddenly, Noah wrapped his arms around Nathaniel, his small frame trembling. "I was so scared," he whispered. "I tried to act brave, but I thought they were going to kill me." Nathaniel froze for a second, unused to such affection. Then he slowly put a hand on Noah's back. "You are safe now," he said. "No one will ever hurt you again, I promise." They left the warehouse. Marcus escorted Noah to a car to take him home. Nathaniel stayed behind with the last survivor. He crouched down in front of him. His gray eyes were like chips of ice. "Who told you about the girl and her brother?" Nathaniel asked. The man spat blood on the ground. "I do not know anything." Nathaniel produced a knife and rested the blade against the man's smallest finger. "I will ask you again," he said calmly. "For every wrong answer, I will take a finger. After that, we will move on to other parts." "I have all night." Pure terror filled the man's eyes. He knew this was not a bluff. "Okay, okay," he screamed. "It was a woman. She called Boss Volkov. She said she was your mother." Nathaniel went completely still. He heard the words, but his mind could not accept them. His own mother had fed information to his enemy, leading to the kidnapping of a child. What did she tell him? Nathaniel's voice was a hollow whisper. "She said you had a weak spot," the man stammered. "The waitress and her little brother. She said it was the perfect way to get leverage on you." Nathaniel stood and walked away, leaving the man to his fate. He stepped out into the frigid Brooklyn air, feeling something inside him break. He had always known his mother was selfish and cruel. He never imagined she could be this monstrous. She was willing to sacrifice an innocent boy just to spite a girl who had bruised her pride. Nathaniel pulled out his phone and called the family's lawyer. The man answered, his voice groggy with sleep. "Do what I commanded last week," Nathaniel said coldly. "Cut my mother off from all family assets, freeze every account and cancel her cards, ensure she never touches Blackwood money again." The lawyer hesitated. "Mr. Blackwood, she is your mother." "Not anymore," Nathaniel replied. "Eleanor Blackwood is dead to me." When Noah's car pulled up to their Brooklyn apartment, Grace was already outside. She threw her arms around her little brother, holding on so tightly he could barely breathe. She just held him, shaking with relief while tears streamed down her face. "I'm okay, sis," Noah whispered. "Nathaniel saved me." Grace finally looked at Nathaniel. He stood nearby, his black suit splattered with blood. His face was exhausted, but his eyes were gentle. She let go of Noah and walked to Nathaniel. Without a word, she hugged him. He was still for a second, then his arms wrapped around her, holding her as if afraid she would disappear. In the freezing night, they held each other like two people who had weathered a storm. "Thank you," she whispered into his chest, "for saving my brother. You kept your promise." He only held her tighter. He put a hand under her chin, lifted her face, and looked into her eyes. "I don't know what I would do if I lost you," he said, his voice rough with unfamiliar emotion. "For 36 years I have not cared about anyone. But now, I cannot imagine life without you." Grace looked into his gray eyes, once so cold, but now filled with a warmth she had never seen. Without a word, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Their first kiss was gentle. It was not rushed or demanding, just two lost souls who had finally found home. From the doorway, Noah grinned and quietly slipped inside, leaving them alone. A year passed. Grace and Nathaniel were dating, keeping their relationship out of the public eye. For their safety, Nathaniel bought a larger apartment for her and Noah. Under Grace's leadership, the Sterling flourished, becoming a top-rated New York restaurant. Eleanor, however, was living in her own personal hell. News of her betrayal spread like a disease through high society. Her powerful friends vanished. Sophia Harrington, the one who first mentioned Grace, now denied ever knowing her. The exclusive clubs revoked her membership. The party invitations stopped coming. Eleanor was alone in her huge, empty mansion. Unable to pay her staff, she had to let them go. She lived on what little personal savings she had, a fraction of what she needed to maintain her old life. On sleepless nights, she stared at photos of Nathaniel as a boy, wondering how she had failed so badly. After 6 months of self-pity, she finally saw a therapist. She went only because the loneliness was unbearable. The sessions, however, forced her to face buried truths. She spoke of a demanding mother, a loveless marriage, and a fear of abandonment that drove her to control everything. She realized she had repeated the same toxic pattern with her own son, destroying the one bond that mattered. The change was slow and agonizing. She learned to accept blame and see herself honestly. She understood that wealth was not a license for cruelty. After a year, she did the hardest thing. She wrote a letter to Grace asking for just 10 minutes. Grace held the letter for a week. This woman had tried to destroy her family. But Grace remembered her mother's words about forgiveness setting you free from hate. She agreed to meet at a quiet Brooklyn cafe. Eleanor looked completely different. She was thinner, grayer, and the arrogance in her eyes was gone, replaced by regret. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "I know I do not deserve this, but I am sorry, for everything, for humiliating you, threatening your brother, and for what I did to Noah. I am not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I regret it all, and I am trying to be better." For the first time, Grace saw not an enemy, but a broken woman trying to heal. 5 years after that night, Grace Blackwood watched from a Maybach as they approached the monarch. She was no longer the worried 27-year-old waitress. She was Nathaniel's wife and a respected co-owner of a restaurant group. Grace was a successful businesswoman, known throughout the industry. Nathaniel opened her door and took her hand. He was still strikingly handsome, but his gray eyes now held a permanent warmth for her. The wedding band on his finger gleamed in the city lights. Noah emerged next. He was a tall 19-year-old, a second-year medical student at Columbia on a full scholarship. He was becoming a doctor, just as he had always dreamed. The last passenger was Eleanor Blackwood. Now 70, her hair was pure silver and her face was kind. After 4 years of therapy and service, she had slowly been welcomed back into the family. The monarch's manager, Richard Porter, was shocked. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice shaking. "Welcome." Grace smiled warmly. "A table for 4, please." They sat at the best table in the house, the very one where it all began. Grace looked around the familiar room, recalling the aching feet and the fake smiles. She remembered the moment she picked up that salmon dish and how it changed her life forever. "Who would guess that a plate of spilled food could change everything?" Eleanor said with a small, wry smile. "A family, a business, and a mother-in-law who learned some manners." Everyone at the table laughed, Grace included. 5 years before, she never would have imagined this peace. But people can change. Eleanor was proof. Noah raised his glass. "Grace," he said, "this is for you, for everything you did for me, for never quitting, and for teaching me that dignity is the one thing no one can take from you." Grace felt tears in her eyes. She held Nathaniel's hand on one side and Noah's on the other. Across the table, she looked at Eleanor. This was her family, rebuilt from disaster and strengthened by forgiveness. Nathaniel lifted his own glass. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to the courage it takes to change." Eleanor nodded, her eyes bright. "And to the kindness that allows others a chance to change," she added, looking at Grace with gratitude. They touched their glasses together. Grace watched the candlelight glow in her wine. She remembered the wine Eleanor had spilled 7 years ago, the raw injustice of that night. Life had a strange way of turning darkness into light. Sometimes you must lose it all to find what truly matters. And sometimes, your greatest enemy can become your family. This is the story of Grace Mitchell. She was a waitress who refused to sacrifice her self-respect for power or money. In the end, she found the happiness she earned. This story shows us that dignity has no price tag. It shows that people can change, and that life gives second chances to those who are brave enough to seize them. What did you think of this story? Have you ever had to defend your own self-respect? Please share your experience in the comments. We value hearing your personal stories. If you found this story meaningful, please press the like button, share it with people you care about, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories each day. We wish you and your loved ones health, happiness, and peace. Goodbye for now. I will see you again in our next video.